Kalmek ground his teeth in blind fury, trying to figure out how to get this damnable door open. Solid steel with a crystal window. At least whoever made it understood just how dangerous the Gorum were. But for the life of him, he could not figure out how to work the opening mechanism. Nor could he push it open. The damnable thing was a pocket door of some kind. Rayya was just behind that door. He wanted to get at her so badly right now. He spat at the ground, the vapor from his mouth like the smoke from a gunshot. The spittle was frozen before it hit the floor. And that's when he heard it, a subtle noise behind him. He twisted and saw a 7-foot Gorum towering above him. The creature balled a fist covered in bony horns, wound up, and swung for Kalmek's jaw. Welcome back to Swords Against Madness, an experimental fusion of storytelling and solo fantasy role-playing games. I'm playing Swords and Wizardry, a modern remake of the original 1974 rules for Dungeons & Dragons, along with a few solo RPG tools. I play the game and then I turn it into a gonzo, psychedelic swords and sorcery story for your entertainment. And along the way, I try to keep it what passed for PG in the 1980s. If you didn't see it in Goonies, Gremlins, or Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, you won't hear it here. So strap on your studded leather kirtle, get comfy in that chainmail bikini, reload your 3-bladed sword, and fire up the wizard van. It's time to get weird. The Gorum's horny fist crashed against the steel wall, leaving a dent just behind where Kalmek's head had been a moment earlier. Even as the creature wheeled around to try and take another swing at the man, a second Gorum came plowing out of a nearby open cryotube and crashed into the first, sending his compatriot sprawling on the ground and standing stunned himself for a moment. Kalmek took full advantage, raking his arming sword across the belly of the one that stood before him. The creature let out a bellow of rage as it bent over double, holding in its guts with one hand as it readied to claw at him with the second. Kalmek didn't give it a chance. He drove his blade straight through the creature's throat, in the most elegant piece of swordsmanship he'd done since his fencing days. The creature gurgled and crashed to the floor. Kalmek wheeled just in time as the first creature slammed its bulk into him, grabbing hold of his wrist so that he couldn't use his sword. Kalmek quickly threw his other hand around the creature's throat and began to squeeze as the creature snapped, trying to ravage his face with its massive teeth. He could feel the sinews of his arms beginning to tear as the creature twisted, trying to get the blade away from him. Kalmek let go of the creature's throat and instead threw a strong punch directly at it. As it choked, he pulled his sword arm free, raised his blade, and struck through the creature's clavicle. Its arm drooped uselessly even as it still tried to throw a punch. He pulled his blade free of its shoulder and struck again at the thing's neck, but it was so densely corded and decorated with metal piercings that he couldn't get the blow he was looking for. The beast rolled back and flung itself to its feet, slashing at him with its hands. Then both of them froze for just a moment as the door stood open. Rayya's wide eyes seemed even more surprised than usual, but only for a moment, and then her face turned to a scowl of hate as she gripped the blade.
What the hell are you doing here, you idiot? And how did they get free?
Fight now, nag later. Kalmek took another swing at the creature, but his blade harmlessly bounced off of metal rings that the creature had riveted into its own flesh.
If I were smarter, I'd just let it finish you off,
she said, but nonetheless, her saber flashed towards the Gorum and cut free one of its ears. The creature staggered back, snarling, swinging wide of Kalmek in its blind fury. Rayya wasted no time. She pushed forward, impaling the Gorum on her saber, and pushing the blade all the way through it, before wheeling it around to use it as a shield against Kalmek's strikes. The miser stepped back a bit, flourishing with his blade and grinning an evil grin. Put that down. You and I have business to settle. Welcome to Episode 7 of Swords Against Madness. In that diminutive 5-room dungeon I created, things are about to get crazy. In Room 1, The magician-turned-cultist-turned-assassin Mormont is bundling up his things to make a break for it, having angered the space smuggler Yanghu. Well, just outside the dungeon, a spaceship has just landed, and a group of heavy monsters, kobolds and lizardmen with laser rifles and explosives, are coming in with plans to kill everything that moves. Meanwhile, Kalmek has damaged the cryostasis system in the dungeon, and the Gorum are beginning to wake up. So far, only 2 have broken loose, but more will be waking up soon. In fact, they have 4 rounds to sort themselves out before they are dealing with more immortal space barbarians. That's about the same time that Miria and Olan have to finish breaking out of their cuffs and pick the lock to the door on the other end of the room so that Rayya can escape. And did I mention the killer robots yet? No? We'll get there. Better strap in. This one's about to be a crazy ride. Mormont was still muttering angrily to himself when he heard the roars of the Gorum in the next chamber. That's all he needed. He decided to leave the provisions behind. He didn't have time for any more packing. He pulled his rucksack over his shoulder and made a beeline for the stairwell out of the structure. He would miss this place. It had been a good hideout, and just when Rayya was starting to prove such a useful minion as well. He supposed she was bait for the Gorum now, and he hoped she made them end it quickly. Well, not too quickly. He needed to get out of there. He burst through the concealed cliffside door and out into the sultry jungle night air. He immediately knew something was wrong. There was a chemical smell on the wind. He turned his head and was immediately blinded by the floodlights of the dropship nearby. The creatures that came out of the glare at him, some large, hulking, a few with scales and tails, some small and skittering, all of them alien and horrifying to him, wasted no time mincing words. One of them thrust out a foot, attempting to kick him over. He squirmed out of the way quickly, then turned and ran for the cover of the canopy. A pulse laser screamed, setting fire to several branches and cutting a swath through the trees. Mormont let out a gurgle as a ray of cohesive light ripped through his back and punched out his front, leaving a straw-thin, smoking hole through him. Adrenaline kicked in after a few staggering steps, and he broke into a full sprint. He wasn't going to die like this. 2 of the smaller, faster creatures turned to run after him, but the big reptilian gestured for them to stop. That one would leave a trail. Right now they have some pest control to take care of before the fun of a hunt. You are listening to the early parts of what was one of the most intense sessions I've ever played in Dungeons & Dragons. It started when I made a D6 random table to help me decide what Mormont was going to do with Miria now that he had her captive. I rolled that he decided he would try and sell her to Yanghu, and I decided as he was a wizard he would be able to eventually figure out how to run the communication systems in the base. Things really hit the fan, however, when I rolled Yanghu's reaction to Mormont's business proposal. Snake Eyes on the 2d6 NPC reaction roll table means that not only is Yanghu not interested in talking to Mormont, he wants to kill him the moment he sets eyes on him. And so I had him deploy a dropship with a team of monsters I thought would work well in the Trassi syndicate. A couple of kobolds, a couple of lizardmen, and an orc, but armed with futuristic weapons and high-tech armor. I asked the Mythic GM emulator if they had a few minutes before the arrival. I got an emphatic no, so I gave myself 2d10 rounds to figure out how long it would take for the dropship to arrive. Stunningly, I only got 6 minutes from the time Mormont completed the call. Meanwhile, Kalmek had awakened 2 Gorum that were attacking him, and as I began to strictly keep time, I ended up having Rayya show up halfway through his battle with them. All of which would have to be happening at the same time that Olan was picking locks for himself and Miria. There were several points in the chaos that ensued where I was running multiple simultaneous combats across several different groups, and the Mythic Game Master emulator, true to form, kept the pressure up the entire time. With a chaos factor score of 90, most of the time if you ask a question, it's going to be a no. But for some reason I had a die stuck on 9 for my tens digit the whole time. Not one single thing went as expected. And because of it, it was an incredibly thrilling ride for me. And I hope you'll enjoy it too as it unfolds. And with that said, I'm going to go straight back into the action.
I've come for what's rightfully mine. Give me that dagger or I'm gonna have to take it off of you.
There was a hiss and a blast of cold air that raised goosebumps across Rayya's flesh. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see that more of the glass tubes were beginning to rise up into the ceiling. 4 rounds remaining, and the Gorum crumpled up on their floors were beginning to twitch.
Are you hard of hearing, stupid, or were you just confused when I was grinding your face into the gravel last time? I'm not done with it. You'll get it back when I am.
Have it your way.
The moment Kalmek moved, Rayya was in action. She grabbed hold of his wrist and twisted, forcing him to let go of his sword. Meanwhile, he shot his own hand out, trying to grab hold of the hilt of the dagger. And Rayya suddenly realized the peril. If she was in grapples with this man and he got hold of that blade, he'd be able to do her in pretty quickly. Okay, I've got it. The far door, the one that led to the room where Miria and Olan had been bound, suddenly hissed open, and more light poured into the chamber. Rayya, where are you? Kalmek reversed the grip. Suddenly his iron-hard hands were squeezing Rayya's wrist as he made another dive for the dagger. 3 rounds remaining. She tried headbutting him, but he was too quick, backing off.
Oh, no, you don't.
Rayya tried her best to force stiff, staggering steps to get them a little closer to the door. Neither of them could clearly see the handful of Gorum that were already stepping out of their tubes. 1 round remaining. Rayya, get out of there! Rayya looked up and saw a group of Gorum forming up, beginning to stalk the pair of them. She threw Kalmek back, turned, and started to run.
No, you don't.
As Rayya turned to sprint away, Kalmek lashed a hand out and grabbed hold of the dagger, pulling it from its sheath. She paused for a split second, then turned and sprinted, throwing herself on the ground towards Olan as he forced the door shut again. A moment later, there was a crash of several heavy bodies slamming against the door. As he held it, a strange magical thrill ran through Kalmek. Exultantly, he drove the dagger into his belt and picked his sword up from the floor as the Gorum began to surround him. All he had to do now was wound the one between him and the door and run for it. He surged forward, blade in hand, taking a swing and suddenly finding that he was holding a weapon far too short. In confusion, he looked down and saw the dagger in his hand and his sword tucked into his belt. He didn't comprehend, nor did he have time to observe that the beautiful woman in the resin hilt of the blade had changed forms and now bore bat wings and horns. Then a massive fist struck him in the head, knocking him senseless, before a handful of Gorum descended upon him to destroy him utterly. Hi there, I hope you like what you're hearing. Today's sponsor is me, and my audio production company, Stormhead Productions. I want to help give you a voice, whether it's a video project, ads for the radio or internet, editing your podcast so you don't have to, or helping you plan everything from the very first ideas all the way down to your marketing strategy. Podcasts are my passion because I love helping other people express their passion. And I want to give you the tools to bring your ideas to the world. Check out my website, https://stormheadproductions.ca, and find out what I can do to help you get your voice out there. Or contact me on Twitter @StormheadAudio, and let me help you sound amazing. That's one repeat villain down, and a few to go. The Mythic GM emulator has turned Kalmek into an interesting foil for me over the last few sessions. While I was handling the scene where Mormont and Rayya discuss what to do about Miria, it told me that the scene would be interrupted by another scene, In this case, an off-screen event where an NPC acted. I rolled that it was Kalmek who was acting, with the prompt Antagonize Danger. When I got that prompt and thought about where the player characters were, I winced, and then I asked the Mythic GM emulator, does Kalmek accidentally wake the Gorum? And I got an extreme yes. So he didn't just wake up a few Gorum, he was going to wake up all the Gorum. Obviously, this would be a stupid and suicidal thing to do, especially if they have something you want. So it was clear that it had to be an accident. While barging in, swinging a sword, and hitting a console might have been colorful, Kalmek is a coward at heart. And if it weren't for his burning desire for revenge and his bruised ego, he probably wouldn't be involved in this caper at all. So sneaking in the back way seemed to make sense. Everything else fell into place really quickly after that, which is why I love Mythic GM Emulator as a tool for solo gaming. And suddenly the pressure is really high. Then I rolled that infamous reaction roll that got Yanghu out for Mormont's blood, and suddenly my player characters are sandwiched between a hell of a lot of dangerous opposition. I will admit I was very tempted to give them some kind of easy out, but that's not the kind of game I intend to play. Nor did I want to spend a lot of time thinking about how they were going to solve the problem. After all, they were under pressure, so I ought to be under pressure. And I'll admit that got me very, very worried. But then, those are the situations I like best when I'm playing D&D. The ones where nobody's giving you any time, you have to think fast, and you have a problem with no obvious solutions. Having problems with no obvious solutions was one of the promises of old school gaming that got me back to playing games like Swords and Wizardry and Osric. I love the challenge that presents, especially when there's some time pressure on to deal with it. Thankfully, it was another old school gaming principle that got me back out again.
If I can get at the circuitry that opens and closes this door, I can force the door open, even if the machines aren't designed to recognize our palm prints. Oh, Frel!
Behind the panel there was a small metal cupboard door with a key lock on the side of it. The panel hung limply by a pair of wires that emerged from a tiny hole in the middle of it.
I need to get past this.
She threw herself to one side as Olan knelt and began working his lockpicks. On the other side of the wall they could hear the roar of Gorum, the clashing of steel, and the shouting of both Rayya and some vaguely familiar voice.
We've got to get her out of there before it's too late.
Oh, trust me, I'm working as fast as I can. Okay, I've got it. Olan managed to finally pop the lock on the panel. He threw it open and stepped aside. Miria lunged in with her knife, cutting some wires and quickly crossing them to create a short circuit. The door hissed open. Rayya, where are you? Then he saw her through the blue-lit haze as she drew a fan of blood from the neck of a Gorum, and then suddenly a man was on her. It only took him a second to recognize Kalmek, as he struggled to reach the dagger on her belt. Rayya still held her bloody sword in her hand, but her wrist was locked, and then Olan noticed the raising of so many more tubes behind them, and shapes stirring in the haze. Rayya, get out of there! Rayya glimpsed at Olan for only a second and bit her lip, then shoved Kalmek back and turned to run.
No, you don't.
Kalmek's arm shot out behind her and grabbed hold of the hilt of the dagger. Rayya gave a single jerk and the blade came free of its sheath. She hesitated for only a moment, bit her lip and threw herself forward, landing at Miria's feet. Miria quickly twitched the wires in her hands and the door slammed shut behind Rayya. Then she yanked out a small crystalline device and threw it against the wall.
That'll keep them out for now, but they know we're in here. When they get to the control room, they'll be able to open this door. We need to keep moving.
Suddenly there was a crash, and a fist-sized convex blister appeared on the door.
Or they might be stupid enough to just punch it down. We need to move now.
What the hell's going on up there? Olan pointed to the control room, which was now full of smoke. Miria spotted the ghosts of laser sights whirling through the smoke.
Bigger trouble than the Gorum.
Rayya pulled herself to her feet, panting, shaking from the adrenaline.
Guys, I need to say, there's no time for that now. You're under a spell. Mormont can make you do anything he tells you. We're not going to hold a grudge for anything you've done in the last couple of hours. Thank you. Olan, we need to get to work on that opposite door.
As a group, they rushed across the room, trying to ignore the hammering on the door behind them. Miria pried up the panel next to that door, and then stepped aside, letting Olan do his thing. The moments drifted, one after another. Olan wiped sweat from his brow, but he just couldn't seem to get this one done. Desperate to be of help, Rayya knelt by the door and had a look at it. There was a small rubber seam at the very bottom of the door. She cut at it with her blade and exposed a tiny crack. Then in a flash of desperation, she wedged her buckler under the lip of the door. The round boss of the shield made it sit at a high angle. Then she took a breath and jumped on her shield. There was a horrible wrenching sound and a sudden spray of liquid around the edges of the door. The sound of snapping brittle metal, and suddenly that 1 inch became 5 inches. Rayya growled, tucked her fingers underneath, and began to push up.
Come on!
In an instant, she, Olan, and Miria were pushing the door up as high as they could get it, and when it was just over a meter in height, they ducked under it.
Well, we won't be able to close it again, but at least it's bought us a few seconds of time.
Then she stopped and gazed in wonder at the room she was in. The walls bristled with laser rifles, heavy plasma casters, razor disc throwers, the nastiest weapons popular with pirates across the galaxy. And in 2 alcoves on the walls, standing in silent vigil next to crystal computer screens, a pair of combat robots.
See if you can get the next door open. I have an idea.
Miria rushed over to one of the consoles next to the robot, waving at it, causing it to light up, and in a fluid motion pulled a cable from some hidden compartment on her bracer and connected it to the side of the crystal panel. Glowing runes, technical and arcane, danced in the air above her wrist, and she began to move them about with her fingers. Olan watched in puzzlement, and then shrugged to join Rayya in prying off the panels. Everyone had a job to do. Shosk caressed the laser pistol in his hand as he watched the screen, the live feed from the kill squad inside. He wanted to be in there himself. The glory of battle, the thrill of doing anything other than maintenance checks. But Yanghu's orders had been very specific. Shosk was not to leave the ship under any circumstance. He let out a discontented growl as he watched his underlings botch the first capture. The door had burst open to the facility, and a tall, skinny human had come running out of it with a bag over his shoulder. The monkey had bolted the moment it saw his troops and disappeared into the jungle. He's pretty sure by the glistening blood he could see on the screen that it had been hit a few times. Perhaps, once the woman was dead, he could persuade Yanghu to let him go hunt that one personally. In the meantime, they'd better find her fast. He watched his men storm down the stairs through a smoke grenade. Sloppy, he needed to work on their formation. The 2 little ones, kobolds, scampered ahead to the console and began working the controls to vent the smoke now that they were securely in the control center. He could tell through the smoke that there was some kind of activity on the arena floor, but what he couldn't say. He was about to bark an order to the orc with the camera when there was a sudden motion at the edge of the field of view. The orc snapped his head hard right just in time to see the grinning skull face of a Gorum emerge from the smoke. Then a fist shot out, and the camera went blank. He listened to the sounds of roars, howling, screaming, and laser fire as he fumbled to try and get another view. This had just gone very bad. The ear-splitting cacophony of metal filled the building as the Gorum finally ripped the door from its pocket and cast it across the cryo chamber. Beyond was the arena, where they had all fought and died several times for the amusement of potential buyers. A place of blood and entertainment. A place of fun. And they could smell the sweat and blood of humans beyond. They could hear a commotion going on in the control room through the window above them and to the left. They didn't care. They were here for fun. Fun is everything to a Gorum, especially fun that screams and bleeds and cries for mercy. They had been excited, and the first one had gone too fast. They were going to make sure that the next ones lasted a long time. Across the way, the far door was suddenly pushed hard up out of the way, and two hulking metal figures stomped into the room.
Unauthorized weapon detected. Containment breach detected. Unauthorized activity detected. Suppression mode authorized.
There was a sudden snapping and crackling noise as the security robots raised their arms, and the smell of ozone filled the room. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Swords Against Madness. As always, it's been a wild ride, and I am grateful to you for coming and listening to it. There is a lot of companion material I generated over the course of this adventure. You can find it in the show notes at swordsthemadness.stormheadproductions.ca, where I keep monster stats, magic items, and other content I create for the game, along with maps, character sheets, and even samples of my role-playing games. I also love hearing from my audience. You can reach me on Twitter at swordsvmadness. The music in this podcast is generated by me, Brian C. Rideout, using Suno AI, and is available for download either on swordsvmadness.stormheadproductions.ca or on Suno, where you can find me under the username Donut Elemental. If you're interested in supporting the show, you can make a small one-time donation using PayPal on my homepage. Or if you're like me and you'd like to buy something, I have a number of products on DriveThruRPG and itch.io through my imprint Death Trap Games. You can learn more about that on my blog, Welcome to the Death Trap, which you can find at deathtrapgames.blogspot.com. And if you just want to shoot the breeze about podcast production, it's one of my favorite topics, and you can reach me at brian@stormheadproductions.ca. Until next time, play hard, roll high, and think weird.